This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
This is Global Business. A very warm welcome to the show. I am Peninah Karibe. As always, we begin with a look at the markets. Activities of profit takers in Nigeria's equities market caused an unexpected negative close recorded today on the bourse. Except for industrial goods, all other NSE sectoral indices closed in the red zone. In Kenya, the picture is pretty much similar to Nigeria, although foreign investors are expected to make a cautious return to the Nairobi's bourse this year, with an eye on rising political temperature ahead of next year's polls, working against expected demand for shares of firms with solid post-COVID prospects. The return is expected to be skewed towards the Safaricom stock, which is expected to show first-up post-pandemic recovery, and other firms which currently have discounted valuations. Coming up on the show tonight, we take a look at how the new U.S. administration could improve ties with African economies. The European Central Bank warns that COVID-19 still poses serious risks to the Eurozone economy. And Egypt partners with China for the country's very first electric cars. We kickstart this show with the new U.S. administration. China's foreign ministry has congratulated President Joe Biden on his inauguration and called for a reset in Beijing-Washington relations. Take a listen.
We congratulate President Biden on his inauguration. Indeed, we had a hard time. I think people in both countries deserve a brighter future after such difficulties. I noticed that the American media said this is a new day in the history of the United States. We also wish President Biden success in governing the country. So many times in his inaugural speech, President Biden stressed unity. I think this is also what China-U.S. relations need now. For the past 4 years, there have been a few anti-China politicians in the United States who have lied too many times just out of selfish interest, inciting too much hatred and division. Both the Chinese and the American people are suffering from those lies. People in China and the United States, as well as the international community, are looking forward to getting China-U.S. relations back on track as soon as possible to solve the urgent challenges facing the world today. Both China and the United States need to show courage and wisdom. They need to listen to each other and respect each other. This is the responsibility of China and the United States as two major countries and the expectation of the international community. With determination, anything is possible.
Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, says the coronavirus remains a crucial focus of the new administration. President Biden has planned a raft of measures to boost COVID-19 response. Michelle Vanderberg now takes a closer look at Biden's economic recovery plan.
Welcome to BizBeat. Today we talk about Biden economy. The newly sworn-in President of the United States didn't mention economic plans in his inauguration speech, but he did talk about the pandemic, inequality, American middle class, and job losses, which lead to his ways of restoring the economy. First, there's the pandemic response. Biden proposed a $1.9 trillion stimulus package to facilitate U.S. recovery from the pandemic. The package includes direct stimulus payments of $1,400 per person, extending unemployment compensation, and continuing eviction and foreclosure moratoriums, and increasing food and child tax credit. It also provides funds for state and local governments to help compensate for lost tax revenues, money for schools to safely reopen, and subsidies for COVID testing and vaccine programs. Treasury Secretary nominee Janet Yellen backed him up in recent days, saying that it is critically important to act now on the economic relief plan, to act big and worry about debt later. And there's inequality. Biden said that he won't raise taxes on people earning less than $400,000 a year. He wants a progressive tax code. His plan is expected to raise nearly $4 trillion in additional revenue over a decade. Jobs. Biden plans to create at least 5 million new manufacturing jobs. He proposed a $700 billion plan to boost America's manufacturing and technological strength. He also wants to spend $1.3 trillion on infrastructure investment over a decade to build roads, bridges, airports, and broadband. Biden also mentioned the American middle class. Revitalizing the middle class and making it more racially inclusive was the cornerstone of Biden's campaign. He believes a growing and thriving middle class is important for social and political stability in the U.S. Trump has left a real mess when he boarded that Air Force One for the last time last evening, both domestically and with their foreign relations, including their economic ties with China. It will be a tough job for President Biden. But one thing we know is that there will be greater predictability with China-U.S. relations going forward.
Let's get more insights now on how President Joe Biden could improve economic relations with Africa. We're joined by Peter Fabricius. He is a consultant to the Institute for Security Studies in Pretoria, South Africa. Peter, thank you for joining us tonight. What can Africa expect from the Biden administration?
In the first place, what it can expect, of course, is a greater show of respect and more coordination, cooperation by the U.S. on global issues that affect Africa. I think the other things that it can expect, and we're seeing some of it already, and those relate to the U.S. role globally, is the U.S. is rejoining the World Health Organization. And as a subsidiary decision to that, it's also joining COVAX. In other words, it will be helping to sponsor the access of developing countries, including African countries, to the COVID vaccine. I think that on that same score, one would hope that, although I'm not sure whether it'll materialize, but when it comes to greater cooperation by the U.S., one would hope that the U.S. might be prepared to do what it hasn't been prepared to do in the UN Security Council, and that is to block its prevention of UN financing for African Union peacekeeping operations, like the one in Somalia, and generally a more kind of multilateral approach to the issue of peacekeeping, security, and fighting extremism and terrorism in Africa. And I think maybe also the reversal of some decisions, like the one decision which I suspect the Biden administration will reverse was the recent one by the Trump administration to endorse Morocco's claim to sovereignty over the Western Sahara. It seems to me that that's quite controversial and also kind of flies in the face of what the existing UN procedure for addressing that issue through a referendum, even though that referendum has been delayed by some 3 decades. But still, I'm not sure that the Biden administration would want to go as far as the Trump administration did.
Now, we've seen Biden reversing many of Trump's policies. Could the bilateral free trade agreement between Kenya and the Trump administration be one of the casualties?
Yeah, I don't see why that should necessarily happen. I can't see the Biden administration having a more hostile attitude in principle to that agreement. It is possible, though, that agreement might fail for a host of other reasons. There are some very sticky issues in the agreement, like the Kenya's imposition of tax on digital services, which is annoying the U.S. Kenya's opposition to genetically modified organisms, and which the U.S. pushes very hard globally. And there are also other issues involving the timing of this. We have the African Continental Free Trade Agreement that has begun trading officially, at least, on the 1st of January this year. And there may be some people who feel that it'd be better for the US to try and get a bigger deal with the whole of the continent through the AfCFTA rather than these bilateral ones. But my own feeling is that they wouldn't do that. You know, it's probably easier for both sides because these trade agreement negotiations are difficult enough as it is to do a bilateral one and see how it goes from there.
Okay, so there are also expectations, Peter, that Biden will reverse Trump's blocking of Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala's appointment as the head of the World Trade Organization. Do you think these expectations are misplaced?
You know, we don't know for sure, but in that case, I'd also think that they might block that veto. I mean, it just doesn't seem to make sense for a Biden administration. It seemed to me to be tied up very much with the Trump administration's more general fight with the World Trade Organization and their desire for a much more sort of compliable director general in the form, in this case, of the South Korean candidate. So I would see them possibly dropping that veto, also in the interest of as part of Biden's, you know, commitment to greater multilateralism, because I mean she's been approved by a clear majority, almost everybody except the U.S. For that post. The one concern I would possibly have is that trade is a very tricky issue domestically as well. And Biden may not want to be seen to be making too many concessions on trade, but I think he will let that go through.
And finally, what should Africa prioritize in its engagement with the United States?
Yeah, look, there's a whole host of things that they could seek. I mean, I mentioned the U.S. Returning to COVAX, or joining COVAX, I should say, under the Biden administration. That was announced by Dr. Fauci. I think Africa could legitimately ask the U.S. to do more and to help them to gain access to a vaccine soon. I mean, the COVAX facilities only provide so many dosage, and clearly Africa needs much more right now, particularly because the second wave and surge is having quite a devastating impact on the continent. So I think they could appeal to Biden for more direct access to U.S. vaccines. I think they could ask for financing for peacekeeping operations, the blockage to be lifted. I'm not sure if that would be done by Biden administration, but I think it's a possibility. It's certainly worth working at. And that could be presented as part of a more general appeal to the U.S. to be less unilateral in the way it handles security issues on the continent and to be more supportive of the AU in the way it does so, even though that presents its own challenges in terms of AU capacity.
All right, Peter, thank you very much for joining us. Peter Fabrice is live for us in Pretoria. In some corporate headlines, the largest labour group at South Africa's Eskom Holdings is blaming poor leadership for the ongoing nationwide power cuts. The group continues to oppose the use of independent electricity producers, which Eskom is counting on to help increase generation. This comes amid Eskom's plans to become profitable again. Still in the country, the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa and the South Africa Cabin Crew Association are heading to court to have a deal regarding back pay of members of SAA declared unlawful and unfair. The unions have called for payments to be made for their members within 7 days if the application is granted. Business rescue practitioners halted salary payments in May, claiming there was no money left to keep the airline afloat. It says East Africa has re-entered the Tanzania market after the opening of a dealership run by its new distributor Al Mansour Auto East Africa Limited. This follows an absence in the Tanzanian market for about 3 years. Al Mansour has invested about $1 million to set up the business, which has started selling the Japanese automaker's range of commercial vehicles. And social media executives have been questioned by U.S. MPs over the role their platforms played during the recent protests in Washington, which saw a mob break into Congress. All executives say they needed to do more to monitor extremist groups and content such as conspiracy theories. However, none of the executives offered any radical new policies. You're watching Global Business. We're taking a short break. Coming up, South Africa's mining sector still in the clear with the country's new lockdown regulations. And easing inflation boosts Zimbabwe's economic recovery.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
Beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Nairobi. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
The South African Reserve Bank has decided to leave the repo rate unchanged at 3.5%. It was not unanimous, though. Two members of the Monetary Policy Committee wanted a 25 basis point cut, while three other members opted to keep the rate at this level. The central bank noted that there are slight improvements in the global economy, with optimism around COVID vaccines becoming available. But the governor has warned of ongoing uncertainty.
Despite very robust terms of trade and stronger exports, getting back to pre-pandemic output levels will take time. Sharply lower public and private sector investment last year and continued weakness in 2021 will weigh on growth prospects. GDP is now expected to grow by 3.6% in 2021 and by 2.4% in 2022. GDP growth of 2.5% is expected in 2023. Overall, risks to the domestic growth outlook are assessed to be balanced. Global growth, vaccine distribution, a low cost of capital, and high commodity prices are supportive of growth. However, new waves of the COVID-19 virus are likely to periodically weigh on economic activity both globally and locally. In addition, constraints to the domestic supply of energy, weak investment, and uncertainty about vaccine rollout remain serious downside risks to the domestic growth.
And so in South Africa, a shutdown of the mining industry would be a last resort in the country's battle against COVID-19. That's according to analysts and industry players. South Africa reintroduced stricter lockdown measures in December. Those rules were extended early this month to include the closure of land borders until February 15th, except for cargo and emergency travel. CGTN's Angelo Coppola tells us more.
The latest lockdown hasn't affected the mining sector, and that's despite a big spike in infections and deaths in December and the early part of January. The sector has been actively managing the situation, and authorities appear comfortable with the actions taken.
I think it's highly unlikely that the government would shut down the mining sector. And I just think it would be shooting from the hip. And I think the fact that the president has been hesitant to move us to a level 4 or level 5, but has rather chosen to stay with level 3 with slightly more stringent regulations and curfew, says to us that, they're not really keen to shut down the mining sector.
The mining sector contributes an estimated 7% to the country's GDP and employs 3% of the working population.
To shut it down in a time where already the economy is weak and a lot of people have lost their jobs would be tantamount to shooting an economic own goal, if one can say. And so if you look at the commodities that are important for South Africa, such as the PGMs, we're the biggest exporter of PGMs, and you look at other commodities that we mine, such as thermal coal, iron ore, manganese, and even gold. Commodity prices are currently at all-time highs, right? And so it doesn't make sense for us to shut down the economy when we could really use those export revenues and we could use those foreign currencies to come into the country.
In terms of managing and fighting the pandemic, the mining sector has led by example.
But I think what is interesting is last year, miners or employees would only get tested if they were showing symptoms of COVID. But now they're much more stringent about that. So every day, every shift, people are getting tested and they are making sure that there's protocols and controls in place to try and measure this thing.
The mining industry has shown even in high infection rates, it can operate, and it can operate fairly safely because it takes a holistic approach. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Easing inflation in Zimbabwe is restoring consumer confidence and giving a boost to economic recovery measures. According to official figures, December inflation was 3.49%, capping months of steady decline from a high of 7.85% in May. From Harare, here's Faremo Kotuya with the details.
Efforts by the Treasury to rein in inflation that had spiraled to a 10-year peak paid off in the latter part of 2020 as the rate of price increases retreated in successive months. Though it did not reach the targeted 300% by year end, it was still a boon for hard-hit shoppers.
That decline in inflation also tends to affect disposable incomes. So what they could buy in the beginning of 2020, in the second quarter and in the third quarter, obviously there is a huge difference because prices would have more or less stayed at the same level.
The gains were achieved by containing money supply growth.
The major driver of inflation in Zimbabwe in the past 3 years has largely been unabated money supply, which was beyond economic growth. Last year alone, money supply grew by over 103%, so that does push inflation. So now, most producers and retailers have been allowed to transact in foreign currency. So what it does is that it reduces demand for foreign currency on the parallel market, which was actually very key in pushing prices up.
However, the restoration of multi-currency regime had some unintended consequences, such as multi-tiered pricing. Shoppers here say because of the market distortions, the value of the local unit continues to be eroded, and that has diminished their buying power.
There has been an improvement for those who earn US dollars. But if you get paid in local currency, it's still difficult to make ends meet.
We hear that the local currency has gained against the US dollar, but it's all in theory. The reality is when you try and go and shop, you don't buy much because things are still going up.
Authorities will argue that the numbers show the increases are at a much slower pace than before, a trend they hope to maintain in 2021, where average annual inflation is projected at below 135%. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Nigeria's public debt is expected to rise this year as a resurgence in COVID-19 cases, weak oil prices and OPEC production cuts hamper its revenues. The West African nation's budget deficit spiked to $15.4 billion in 2020 as it reported a 27% revenue shortfall. Here's Kelechi Emekalam with more details from Abuja.
Nigeria's parliament recently approved the 2021 budget of $35.66 billion, its most ambitious yet. The budget is based on an oil price of $40 per barrel and a daily production of 1.86 million barrels. $20.26 billion is available to fund the budget, meaning that the country would have to borrow as much as $15.4 billion to fund its deficit. With the dwindling oil prices and economic disruptions caused by COVID-19, experts anticipated a worse scenario.
We expected 60% shortfall on revenue. So if they are able to do 70-something, it's great stuff, because we expected twice more drop than what was recorded. But having said that, we still finished the year spending more than what was budgeted. You notice that we spent 10 trillion, whereas we budgeted 9-point-something trillion. So how come? So it's a moving target. But what is actually very significant is that the underspend of about 1 trillion in the last year 2020 budget on capital is continuing in the first quarter of 2021, which is good news. And at the same time, the budget for this year, 2021, has a capital component of over 30%, which is also a record allocation.
Crude oil constitutes about 90% of Nigeria's export revenue, but price volatility has left the country struggling to finance its budgets. Government's looking to spend its way out of one of its worst recessions in decades.
Spending actually is one way out of recession, and of course, because the more you spend, the more you provide the basic things for government and for the people. But it should be such that instead of spending our way out of recession, all we need to do is to cut our expenditure and spend according to what we have. That way, we're not going to be borrowing a lot to take care of our basic needs.
The 2021 budget is expected to place Nigeria's economy on the path of recovery, growth and resilience. But that may be short-lived if government fails to diversify its economy and maximize possible revenue sources.
There is no state of this country today that does not have its own endowments, either in mineral resource or in tourism or in many other things. Many times some people will just talk about agriculture or mineral resources. No, but there are many other sources of revenue. I don't understand why we have not taken the mineral resources area very seriously in this country. And like I said, tourism is a major area. ICT is one area that we can even export, because the way Nigeria is just growing in ICT is such that we can actually generate a whole lot of revenue from that area.
As Nigeria enters another fiscal year, experts suggest that government builds a strong fiscal discipline, explore internal revenue generation sources, and block leakages and loopholes, measures that would help generate revenue and reduce the budget deficit. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
You're watching Global Business. Let's take a short break. Straight ahead. The European Central Bank warns that COVID-19 still poses serious risks to the Eurozone economy. And we bring you the highlights of the Milan Fashion Week.
Taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting.
It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Over the last 14 hours of rain.
No one again began holding guns. Machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
The Excellency, thank you very much for your time now. What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
To see patients in a hospital bed and their family members are not there, there's no one there to hold their hand, that human touch, you know?
I just hope everyone can remember that the situation is not permanent and that everything will get better eventually.
Let's have a look at other stories making headlines today. Donald Trump left office having completed the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Somalia. Their departure comes at a critical time for the Horn of Africa nation as it plans to go to the polls amid increased threats from insurgent groups. U.S. officials said some of the 700 troops in Somalia would move to neighboring countries, allowing for cross-border operations. Africa's COVID-19 case fatality rate is now higher than the global average. The Africa CDC director says the continent's death rate stands at 2.5% against a global average of 2.2%. In addition, the number of nations recording higher rates is growing. Earlier in the pandemic, Africa recorded lower death rates than the global average. However, in the second wave, 21 African nations had a death rate above 3%. And the International Organization for Migration says 48 migrants have been rescued off the coast of Libya. Among them are 11 children and a woman. The organization said in a tweet on Wednesday that staff were at the Tripoli port to provide emergency assistance. IOM stressed that Libya is not a safe port for disembarkation. Even so, thousands attempt to cross the Mediterranean Sea each year trying to reach Europe. That's a look at some of the day's top stories. The rapid spread of the coronavirus pandemic is considered to still pose a threat to the Eurozone economy. European Central Bank President Christine Lagarde says the coronavirus-induced lockdowns have also largely contributed to economic deterioration. European countries recently commenced the inoculation of its citizens in late December. However, the rollout of vaccines has proved to be challenging.
The start of vaccination campaign across the euro area is an important milestone in the resolution of the ongoing health crisis. Nonetheless, the pandemic continues to pose serious risks to public health and to the euro area and global economies. The renewed surge in COVID-19 infections and the restrictive and prolonged containment measures imposed in many euro area countries are disrupting economic activity. Overall, the risks surrounding the euro area growth outlook remained tilted to the downside, but less pronounced. The news about the prospects for the global economy, the agreement on future EU-UK relations, and the start of vaccination campaigns is encouraging. But the ongoing pandemic and its implications for economic and financial conditions continue to be sources of downside risks.
China's central bank has removed the upper and lower limits on credit card interest rates. This is part of its plan to allow for more market control of the economy. The move is expected to foster competition among banks as well as between banks and fintech companies. Zhang Xishuan finds out how financial institutions and credit card users are reacting to the news.
Chinese have been getting used to spending money in advance for more than 30 years, since the first credit card was issued here in 1985. But most users we talk to don't seem too sensitive about how much they are actually paying in interest if they don't make their payments on time.
I never pay attention to the interest rate.
China's central bank previously set a lower limit on daily interest rates of 0.7 times 0.05%. The upper limit was the full 0.05%, which in fact most banks followed. But what did that actually mean to card users? What would you think if the bank charges you an interest rate of 0.05% a day?
I have no idea about the amount.
Actually, that's equivalent to an annual rate of 18.25%. What do you think of that?
Oh, that's awful. It's too much.
Under the new policy, credit card issuers can set their own interest rates for overdrafts. But when we contacted some banks, most told us that they had not yet changed their rates.
The interest rate for overdrafts has always been 0.05%. We haven't changed it. It's not as if we negotiate with you if you don't pay on time, but if you really have trouble paying, you can negotiate with us. The rate has always been 0.05%.
Industry insiders believe that the removal of the interest rate caps is expected to bring lower interest rates in the future, however. With flexible interest rates, banks will be able to attract customers by introducing differentiated credit card products and lower overdraft interest rates to lure users from online platforms, which now help users take out small loans.
According to Ant Credit Pay, its annualized rate is some 15%, with the daily rate of 0.04%. And the 0.05% that most banks are offering is a little bit higher, and it's more convenient to use those payments on internet platforms. The regulations will help grab the younger generation, which spends a good deal.
Su says with market-oriented interest rates, banks can work out different credit card rates according to users' credit scores to meet the needs of different user groups.
For some high-quality consumers, banks can set a relatively low interest rate for them to attract them to use credit cards. But for those with high risks of overdrafts, banks can accurately recognize the risks and offer them higher rates. The new move allows banks to have more valid and customized risk control.
Last August, the Chinese Supreme People's Court slashed legal private lending rates to 15.4% from a previous cap of between 24% and 36%. While the new private lending limit is not closely linked to the rates at commercial bank credit cards, Su says the change in the bank regulations will maintain consistency in the loan market. Zhang Shixuan, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
Global tourism is hard hit by the pandemic, and it could take a prolonged period of time before a meaningful recovery happens. Facing up to this new reality, some tourism companies are now turning their attention to the virtual world. Michelle Beggy has more from Bogota, Colombia.
Colombia's tourism industry was breaking records in 2019. That all came crashing down in 2020 with the pandemic. One Colombian tourism company decided to take their exotic destinations into the living rooms around the world. The company started compiling its audio-visual content to create virtual tours.
Many of our guides had personal audiovisual material, and we had never explored this. For example, images of the almost 2,000 varieties of bird species in Colombia.
What they found was a new business opportunity. The company called Outlanders began offering personalized tours with local guides who share their knowledge and answer questions. The audiovisual material gives virtual travelers a first-hand look at some of the country's most remote regions.
Finding new ways to do tourism is vital for this sector, which has taken a huge hit with the pandemic. According to the United Nations World Tourism Organization, international arrivals tumbled last year 81% in July and 79% in August, typically the two peak travel months in the Northern Hemisphere.
In Colombia, there was a lot of growth, 5 or 6% annual growth in tourism, which was higher than the international average growth. And so there is a high expectation and investment in the tourism infrastructure.
Outlanders founder says that while tourism is down, they have hosted more than 2,000 virtual tourists. Some even flew to these tourism spots once flights in Colombia reopened. But this company says they are planning to continue this new venture as it connects with clientele they had never been able to reach before.
The interesting part is that many people have been able to see parts of the country that they would never have been able to travel to because of time or medical constraints or even age, when they can't go to these challenging nature tours.
This nature tour is taking a page from nature, adapting and evolving for survival. Michelle Beggy, CGTN, Bogota, Colombia.
And now to the ongoing Milan Fashion Week, which is unfolding entirely on computer screens and social media platforms this round for the first time, as the persistent virus resurgence dashed any hopes of even a handful of physical shows. Fashion powerhouse Prada unveiled its Spring-Summer 2021 women's wear collection by Miuccia Prada and Raf Simons. Take a look.
No traffic jams, no rush to the next venue, no front rows, not even socially distanced. The Milan Fashion Week is going full digital. In its online preview on Sunday, Prada introduced the first anti-uniform that speaks to our new intimacy in our ever tighter circles, luxury long johns. The first menswear collection by the Miuccia Prada Ralph Simmons collaboration, announced almost a year ago, was unveiled on a runway, traversing spaces clad in soft fall fur in purple, celeste and scarlet. Skinny men in tight-knit union suits in graphic architecture-inspired patterns groove in outtakes sliced into the runway show. The union suits emphasize both the human body and freedom, which the designers say are something fundamental to the collection.
For me, it's completely natural that if we both think about something and it doesn't really match, that we just say like, oh, skip, move on, next thing, because there are so much more things that do match.
Or the other one convince you, for instance, all my life I hated pinstripe, and this show is full of pinstripe, and they love it, I am in love, and yesterday was the one, more pinstripe. So also what I think is good is the possibility to change your mind.
The show, like others, was broadcast on a maxi screen in the heart of Milan's shopping district. But with the city and region around it plunged into yet another partial lockdown on Sunday, what energy was missing from the streets of Milan was recouped on social media. Fendi, Etro, and outdoor brand Quay intended physical shows with guests, but had to scale back to closed-door runways. Etro's Parsley took on a casual flair in silky top or baggy trousers paired with crossbody bags and baseball caps. Quay's rain slickers, trenches, and parkas got the fashion cred from streaks, bright color, and varied silhouettes. Shen Li, CGTN.
Let's look at the commodities market. Oil prices eased on an unexpected rise in U.S. crude stockpiles, though hopes for an economic revival kept losses in check. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude dipped 0.24% a barrel. Brent crude fell 0.16% per barrel. Industrial metals such as copper, nickel, and iron ore all rose, while spot gold was a shade lower at $1,866 per ounce. Still ahead on Global Business. Egypt partners with China for the country's very first electric cars. And tech giant Huawei inks a deal to digitize Tunisia's education sector.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo, Juba, Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival, and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Egypt's state-owned Al Nasser Automotive Company has signed a deal with China's Dongfeng Motor Corporation to assemble electric vehicles for the first time in the North African nation. The deal will see the Egyptian automaker produce 25,000 cars annually for local consumption in the first phase of production. From Cairo, here's Yasser Hakim with more details.
Leading Chinese automaker Dongfeng Motor Corporation has won the bid to produce electric vehicles in Egypt's Al Nasser Automotive's assembly lines, as well as overhaul the North African state's plant, which was nearly liquidated last year. Production is planned to commence within 12 months.
A Chinese company was chosen because China is leading the world in developing electrical vehicles. Although Tesla from the U.S. was the pioneer and some in the European Union, China has overcome them all. The partnership is with the huge Chinese company Dongfeng, which produces 3.5 million vehicles and is one of top 4 companies in China. It's the right choice to help us build a national industry in this domain.
The aim of this project is to decrease vehicle imports, boost local manufacturing, and expand renewable energy in the transport sector. Natural gas is already widely used in Egypt, but the government is now tapping electric vehicles as only 300 roam Egyptian streets.
There are many advantages of using electrical vehicles. If the monthly budget for fuel is, let's say, 1,000 Egyptian pounds, the electrical car charging would cost 20%. Secondly, maintenance is minimal. There is barely no cost. Third, it's eco-friendly. It has 0 emissions.
The car will come in a competitive $19,000 price tag. To encourage more people to buy electric cars, low interest rate loans will be available and up to $3,000 discounts offered on buses and taxis. But there are still challenges ahead.
We need to build an infrastructure for charging facilities, for electric mobility, improve the grid capacity, specifically distribution grid, to enable supply point. From generation side or availability of electrical energy, there is no challenge at all. Egypt has already a surplus in electricity supply. For public transportation, there will be no problem, as will be a kind of collective charging point in the pods or in gas station. But for the private charging point, it might be need to update also the building code to allow this charging facilities.
To ensure accessibility and success of this project, the government and the private sector are establishing 3,000 charging stations countrywide to be complete in 3 years. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Tunisia's Education Ministry has signed a deal with Chinese telecom and electronics manufacturer Huawei to help digitize its education sector. As CGTN's Adnan Shawashi reports, the agreement seeks to establish an infrastructure for the digitization process while setting up an elaborate ICT network.
Tunisia's regional education delegate of the northwestern region of Jandouba and representative of the Education Ministry has welcomed Huawei's commitment to uplift education in the North African country.
We are honored with this leading experience with Huawei in Tunisia. The company has provided all the necessary IT equipment, which is the best in the market. This initiative will help our pupils in improving knowledge and developing new skills. We thank Huawei for this valuable support and professional service.
Huawei Northern Africa's Vice President in charge of public relations for the Mediterranean region noted that the company promotes the values of corporate social responsibility by adopting policies that promote the well-being of the Tunisian society.
Today is our pleasure to be here in Jandouba in this secondary school. Huawei we had the action to provide computer equipment to the students here. I think this will really help the students to be more familiar with technology and maybe create some new vision, or some students will have a more tight relationship with technology in the future.
The director of Abu al-Qasim al-Shabi School in Jandouba declared that Huawei's administration, technicians and engineers in Tunisia have completed the ICT laboratory in record time. Students say that the equipment will encourage more youths to pursue engineering studies.
We were surprised by the rapid implementation of the project and by Huawei's offer to help schools and digitize education.
My dream is to become an IT engineer. I thank the donors for the computers and the modern equipment because it will help students in remote regions realize their dreams.
According to Huawei's representatives in Tunisia, the Chinese tech giant is committed to bridging the digital divide, promoting equal access to educational opportunities, and building a better connected world.
Huawei aims to create smart learning services destined to Tunisian students by using artificial intelligence and new technologies. Tunisian authorities assert that the reform of the education sector necessitates the introduction of modern technologies. Adnan Shawashi, CGTN, Tunis.
And finally, we look at the currencies now. South Africa's rand gave back some of its gains of the day following the announcement by the Reserve Bank's Monetary Policy Committee to hold the repo rate steady at a record low of 3.5%. The decision was in line with market expectations. It comes as South Africa reels from a new wave of COVID-19 infections and after harder lockdown restrictions were introduced in late December. And with that, we come to the end of Global Business tonight. Do send your feedback to the contacts on the screen and follow us on our digital media platforms. I am Peninah Karibe. Thank you for watching.